Hey everyone, so Wuthering Waves, the new open world gacha game, has been out for about a week now, and I wanted to make this video to give my honest thoughts and review of the game's release. For a bit of context, I did not have access to their closed beta tests, so all of my thoughts and my impressions are based on the 80 or so hours I've put into the game since its global launch. In this video, I want to talk about the story, the exploration, the world design, the combat, the gear system, and the endgame, and just some other thoughts and concerns I have with the game. There's a lot to cover here, so let's just jump right into it. The first thing I want to do is just address the elephant in the room. Wuthering Waves' launch was about as rocky as it could have gone, and that was 95% due to poor optimization. People were experiencing frequent crashes, graphical glitches that turned character models into straight up monstrosities, subtitles that would just cut out at the bottom of the screen, fatal Unreal Engine errors, and all kinds of performance issues that just made the game hard to play or even flat out unplayable. Now, games these days live and die by their first impressions, so with such a rocky start, Wuthering Waves unfortunately had to alienate a lot of their potential players from the get-go, and kind of overnight became a meme in the gacha gaming community. For me, I've been very lucky, and I've only suffered a couple frame drops and a single crash, but Kuro Games, the developers behind Wuthering Waves, have been very quick and responsive to these technical issues. Not only have they issued a ton of in-game rewards as apology and compensation, they appear to be working day and night to roll out hotfixes and patches to fix these issues. So for now, it's definitely a very good sign to see that the developers are aware and mindful of the troubles that their players are facing and are so far very earnest and sincere in trying to make a better game experience for everyone to play. I will say though, as of right now, it still feels like a bit of a messy situation because while they might fix one thing, another part of the game seems to break. For example, for me, the first 5 days or so have been running perfectly fine, but shortly after one of their big hotfixes came in, the game just stopped having ambient music in certain zones at all. It might sound like an easy fix, but these are all small inconveniences and obstacles that prevent players from enjoying the game. And if too many of these inconveniences add up, then eventually there'll be a tipping point for a lot of these players that'll make them quit the game. My big concern with this is that from a technical standpoint, the game was clearly not ready to be released. And while it's clear to me that the devs are working day and night to get things fixed, my worry going forward is how long will we have to wait? How many hotfixes and patches do we need to go through before A, the game's performance is up to a level where it doesn't become a pain point for a lot of players, and B, the game is able to eliminate that reputation of technical issues, kind of like what games like Cyberpunk and No Man's Sky were able to do over the course of many years. Now the next thing I want to talk about is the story. The launch of Wuthering Waves gave us 6 acts or chapters of main story content, and a good number of side quests and exploration quests to get a better feel of the world. If you have been paying any attention to the gacha gaming sphere on the internet, you would know that a lot of people are not happy with the story of Wuthering Waves, and I share a very similar sentiment. To me, the Wuthering Waves story so far can be easily divided into 3 distinct sections. The main story up until around Act 4, the story from Act 4 to the finale in Act 6, and kind of just everything else other than that. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The first couple acts of Wuthering Waves was terrible. It was a total snooze fest. Hell, if I wasn't so excited for the combat and the characters, I might have just uninstalled right there. The biggest issue with the early acts of Wuthering Waves is that it does the same thing that a lot of gacha games do wrong. They spend way too much time trying to get you invested and up to speed with the world from the get-go that it just becomes an overwhelming slog of names and terminologies that you're not even going to remember 2 minutes later. Some people have criticized the voice acting as a big part of why the story sucked, but I think that no matter what language dub you're playing in, it doesn't change the amount of info dumping that they succumb you to. It's only perceived to be worse on the EN side because the lack of proper voice direction only exacerbates the weaknesses of the story it already has. Like, let's be real, do you think anyone who just started the game is going to remember the words Trinodian Retroact Rain, let alone understand or even remember what this tongue twister even means? Hell, I've already beaten the story and I still can't even explain what it means. But I will say that the main story after Scar's appearance does begin to pick up. His pretty on-the-nose analogy of the Black Sheep, the appearance of Camilla, Encore, and Alto, and the final showdown where you fight alongside your homies, these parts were noticeably step-ups from the slog of the earlier parts. The info dumping here was way less egregious. The dialogue and the dynamics between characters, in this case I'm mostly referencing Encore and Alto here, were way more enjoyable to watch, and the rendering and camera work was incredible and really fit the intensity of the situations. Overall, I liked the last acts of the main story, but I can see why even this major step up did not really land with some people. In some way, these last 3 acts were pretty much playing catch up because of how poorly the earlier acts set up and built up towards this climactic finale. In my eyes, one very glaring example of this was that moment when you're fighting to leave the base and join Jian, and you kind of get this Avengers Assemble shot with all the other Resonators helping to defend the city. It's cool and all, but the problem is, Marvel's Avengers had years and years upon movies to build up to their moment, whereas Wuthering Waves spent 3 acts telling us about Threnodian retroact rain and the significance of some candy instead. To make things even worse, some of these characters didn't even meet prior to this. Like, I'm pretty certain Yuan Wu and Ling Yang were not even featured in the main story before this point, so it just comes across as awkward and cringe because they're just kinda there, and they think they're part of the team. Now, I want to praise the last acts of the story while also sharing some of the big criticisms I have for it, because my big concern is that I don't want the positive reception of the final acts to set a precedent where the developers and writers think they can just justify info dumping and needless fluff in the beginning as long as we get a cool animated cutscene at the end. It happens in other gacha games. That was one of my biggest gripes with Honkai Star Rail's 2.2 story, and I hope now that we've got a lot of these big names and terminologies out of the way, the dialogue going forward and the writing can be a lot more concise and polished and developed. To kind of wrap this section off, I wanted to talk about the companion quests and the exploration quests and side quests as well. The side quests I can't really comment too much because they tend to follow a similar structure of finding something on the map and beating up enemies along the way, but the companion quests and the exploration quests, those have been surprise hits for me. For the exploration quests, they're well written and they're very compelling. I especially like the one about the morning ice, but for the ones I've played so far, once you've completed those quests, it makes permanent changes to the map and the terrain. For example, the Sea of Flames region, you would take ticking damage when you walked around, but after doing the exploration quest there, you'd be free to run around without taking damage. There's that area near the morning ice boss that would previously send you back to a black screen because you got too close to a tornado, but after a certain exploration quest there, the tornado clears up and you get to explore that area too. It's a nice touch that I think makes the world feel more immersive and dynamic and engaging. As for the companion quests, it's kind of clear to me that the Jian and Ling Yang quests were trying to explore interesting themes in their characters, but to me it's pretty obvious that there's a big difference in their execution. Everything from the dialogue, the quest structure, the level design, and the ambience made Jian's quests way more compelling and enjoyable than Ling Yang's. I think overall, they were good as far as our first taste of companion quests go, and I hope that Kuro continues to use these companion quests to explore themes that may not necessarily fit with the main story. Because if there's anything I've learned from Kuro's other game, Punishing Grey Raven, they are definitely not afraid of exploring some very dark and mature themes through their characters and stories. I feel like if they keep up this consistent schedule of high quality companion quests, it will make a lot of characters way more interesting and compelling, and it'll give a lot of potential exploration to characters that may not get a lot of screen time in the main story. Before we move on, I wanted to talk about the music. As far as the ambient music goes from zone to zone, each zone gets their own distinct theme that kind of matches their aesthetic, and I think they did a really amazing job with this. The city of Jinzhou has a really lively sense of civilization and activity. The area around the violet banyan tree has an uplifting sense of uninterrupted nature, whereas the music around the port city and the Sea of Flames feels way more tense and somber to really reflect the destruction and loss that you can see in the terrain. The main problem and I'm sure a lot of people have with the music is that it's just not really memorable. For me, this is most obvious with the boss fights. I think in the moment they're definitely bops, but the moment I fought the Crownless and the Dreamless, I knew I was probably not going to remember that tune after the fight finished, and that was correct. I just feel like they don't have that catchiness and excitement factor that makes other boss themes stick with you down the line. And I think this is such a huge shame because Kuro's other game, Punishing Grey Raven, has some incredible boss themes. Narwhal and Lamia are arguably some of the best boss themes in all of gacha games. You can literally slot them into any fight scenario and you'll feel your adrenaline pumping. But from the looks of it, it appears that Wuthering Waves is using an in-house music team this time rather than outsourcing the Vanguard sound like they did in PGR. For now, I think only time will tell whether the in-house team can improve and deliver on their music, but in my honest opinion, I think if we go 3 patches or 4 patches from now and we get new bosses to fight, but their themes aren't memorable or exciting either, and I think Kuro should really bite the bullet and outsource the boss themes to Vanguard for Wuthering Waves. Now moving on to the exploration and overall world design. I'm just going to keep it a buck and say that they hit it out of the park with this one. The fact that the game lets you sprint without consuming stamina when you're out of combat, the fact that you can sprint up walls like you're Spider-Man, the fact that you can fling yourself over ledges that would normally obstruct you, and the fact that you can naturally unlock tools to make finding chests easier for yourself is just so satisfying. I think the big thing here is that they realize that people simply want to get from point A to point B. So outside of just fast traveling, how can they make this as fast and smooth as possible for different players? Not to mention, the world is littered with puzzles and challenges for you to solve, and I think they did a good job with how much variation there is in the puzzle mechanics. Like you've got parkour challenges, shooting challenges, fly through the hoops as a bird challenges. In some you could be throwing firebombs to reveal a hidden item, or hitting pillars in a specific order, or using objects in the overworld to trigger a pressure plate. The good thing about all this is that the puzzles have varied mechanics, but they're still intuitive enough to solve. There's enough space around each puzzle where if you simply panned your camera and looked around or even used the sensor tool that they give you for free, you can easily spot which tools and mechanics you need to use to solve the puzzle. Now what about the world and zone-to-zone design? I'm personally a big fan of it. As you could have probably guessed by what I said about the music, I love that the different zones of our 1.0 launch map have such distinctly different feels. Like it's nice that the city of Jianzhou is this industrial hub with large buildings and Chinese-inspired structures. But it's just as awesome to go west for a bit and see collapsed buildings, broken bridges, and trains that are kind of just suspended in the air. You go north for a bit and you see vast mountainous regions with this giant monster golem staring back at you off in the distance. And you go all the way back south and you see giant trees and rainforest regions. The contrast from zone to zone and the fact that different monsters spawn depending on which zone you're in makes the overall world feel much more interesting and lived in, because each of these zones are pretty much sub-regions with their own distinct topographies, geographies, and stories for why their terrain and monsters turned out that way. It gives me confidence that for future updates, even if we have a rough idea of how the story will play out, what kind of new zones we'll get will be extremely unpredictable and something that will keep exploring new regions fresh and exciting. Now we finally get around to the combat. I mean, this is no exaggeration, but Wuthering Waves' combat is probably the best combat system you'll ever find on the gacha market. For all the criticisms that the game gets for poor hit satisfaction, I think the sound effects and hit satisfaction when you do a perfect parry is just incredible. And the slow time when you do a perfect dodge is so satisfying because it makes the fights feel more dynamic and cinematic. And the game has good reason to be so dynamic and cinematic. Some of the hardest fights in the game make you go up against bosses with a bunch of threatening patterns and mechanics that you have to be aware of. That being able to continuously perfect dodge and parry these massive attacks requires a good amount of precision and skill. So when you actually play it out and pull off these dodges and parries while fitting in your own damage, it's extremely intense and adrenaline inducing. The other thing is that because the intro and outro skills for each character are so strong and benefiting to your team-wide performance, swapping characters is pretty much mandatory if you want to achieve high-end content. My big concern coming from PGR was that the meta there evolved into it being a major damage loss if you swapped off your characters, but here it's relieving to see that you're often encouraged to swap around, especially because of the fact that you can cancel attacks with longer animations by swapping to other teammates. So if you're good enough, you can pretty much have all three members of the party on the field doing a specific move at the same time, which is extremely cool and cinematic, and gives you that sense that the party members are really doing coordinated attacks with each other and working together as an actual team. The gearing system in this game is also pretty interesting too. Pretty much every enemy you fight in the overworld has a chance to drop an echo, which becomes one of your gear pieces. And you can unlock special gear bonuses if you equip 2 or 5 pieces from the same set. This method of gearing and farming is really interesting because now, even after exploring most of the map and collecting most of the chests and doing most of the puzzles, there's still an incentive to go back out there and do things rather than keep all your activity to a very localized part of the map like city hubs and farming nodes. At this stage of the game though, there are a couple issues with the gearing and the farming. The big problem is that we can't use Father Echo as experience for other echoes we actually want to level up. At the stage where I'm at in the game, I'm not really interested in merging Father Echo for a chance at a good one. The single biggest bottleneck I have is Echo experience material so I can really push my stats higher. And as of right now, the only place to reliably get Echo experience is through these tacit field farming nodes. But because the rewards are split between Echoes, tuning materials which unlock the substats of the Echo you're leveling, And then finally, Echo Experience material. The fact that we don't have a dedicated place to farm Echo Experience makes it really stamina inefficient to farm. The other big bottleneck that needs to be highlighted is materials for tuning and unlocking substats. For some reason, we can synthesize talent materials to go from green materials to blue materials and then to purple materials, but why doesn't this system exist for tuning materials? For a lot of people that will eventually hit databank level 15 and start dropping only purple and gold tier echoes, realistically they would really only want to tune their gold tier echoes, meaning they'll have an abundance of blue tier and purple tier tuning materials that they can't use. It's such a simple fix that'll go such a long way in making sure that players don't have wasted resources in their inventory. And on the topic of inefficient farming, this may change as we progress further and our world levels improve, but because doing the passive field nodes are so inefficient, it also means that getting good 3-star echoes is incredibly difficult to farm. In general, you want to distribute your echoes loadout as 1 4-star echo, 2 3-star echoes, and 2 1-star echoes. And for those 2 3-star echoes, you would obviously want to target relevant main stats like energy regen or elemental damage boost. But because the potential pool of main stats on 3-star echoes is so much bigger, getting a 3-star with the right set and then the right main stack can take a lot of farming. And the reality is a lot of people simply won't have the time to farm all of those specific 3-star monsters in their overworld and then go into co-op with their friend to farm that same monster again. I still think there's a lot of potential with the ecosystem. For now, it's still very engaging and fun to track specific monsters and go back to different places in the overworld, but there are a number of things that they can tune to make farming echoes less annoying. Like I said earlier, they can quickly implement a way to fuse lower tier tuning materials into golden ones. They should let us use fodder echoes as experience, and they should really consider lowering their wave play cost of doing passive fields, as well as consider making specific farming nodes for just echo experience and or tuning materials. Some people might say that a lot of these opinions come from the fact that I rushed the game from day one, and that we don't need to get super good gear so early on, but with how the systems are right now, even if we get to max account level, these resource constraints will still be there. It would still take forever to get echo experience, tuning materials, and 3-star echoes with actually usable main stats. If we just assume that a player doesn't have enough time in their day to farm the overworld, what sort of time frame are we looking at for them to get their favorite character fully equipped with even just the right main stats and all their echoes level 25? As it stands, these kinds of resource constraints are only going to hurt the player experience because that feeling of getting stronger and progressing will feel much more like a drag, and they will be less incentivized to spend money and pull new characters because they know in the back of their minds there'll be another slog to get them fully built too. Finally, I want to talk about the endgame in Wuthering Waves. Right now we have a few permanent game modes available to us. The Tower of Adversity is a challenge mode where you use your own team and builds to fight stages that come with specific effects. The Depths of Elusive Realm being a roguelike mode where you unlock new passives and bonuses the further you progress. And the Tactical Hologram is like a super boss type game mode where you fight a single boss, and as you progress in difficulty, the boss unlocks new mechanics and patterns. Right now, I think these modes are pretty interesting and engaging. The tower stages have pretty useful buffs that go a really long way in boosting your damage and rotations and can really help you shorten your clear time. The big highlight of the tower is that you can swap gear freely between your teams, so even if I technically require 3 teams to clear the content, I don't necessarily need all 9 members to be fully geared out as long as they share similar gear sets or weapon types. This is a massive quality of life bonus because it makes dipping your toes into endgame content much more accessible, because it means that for your second and third teams they may not have your favorite characters. As long as you get their levels and talent levels up to par, you could realistically run them in these higher end content. As for the Elusive Realm, it's been an absolute blast to play. Not only is it a huge quality of life bonus to let us use trial characters that we may not necessarily have built or even have, but the different combinations of passives and bonuses makes it such a different and much more fast-paced experience compared to the overall gameplay. Each main echo you start with comes with a bunch of unique bonuses if you spec into them, which drastically alters how you play and just how much stuff and special effects are on your screen. You can even do other cool things like have 100% uptime on Jiyan's ultimate state. You can spend more time transformed as your echo. You can call in your allies to assist you with their ultimates. The other cool thing is that the shop tied to the Elusive Realm comes with golden 3-star echoes with very powerful main stats. To me, it's kind of a band-aid fix for the echo farming problem I brought up earlier, considering that this store only refreshes 1 time per patch, but it gives us a bit more reason to go back into the Elusive Realm on a consistent basis. As for the tactical hologram, I think it's really cool that they add new mechanics as you progress in difficulty, because now the fights feel more difficult than just simply being health sponges that hit a little bit harder each time. Now you have to deal with the patterns of the main boss, and for some bosses they might even spawn clones in the corner of the arena that shoot things that can pretty much one-shot you. It's definitely a real test of skill in terms of how well you can dodge and parry these patterns, as well as dish out your own damage in the time frame allowed. There's not much else I can really say about it other than the fact that over-leveling this hologram seems really unviable considering how hard the bosses hit. It can also get frustrating because you're on a timer, but so many of these bosses have invulnerability patterns and mechanics where they just fly up in the sky or jump onto structures that are just above you. And considering this is single clear content, the real question going forward is how often they can introduce new world bosses and holograms for us to tackle. That concludes my very long review of Wuthering Waves after a week of playing. At launch, I firmly believe that the game right now is a solid 7 out of 10 with a great foundation when it comes to combat systems, character designs, world designs, and the developer's willingness to respond to feedback. To kind of answer the question in my title of whether the game will succeed, I think the amount of attraction and hype the game had surrounding its launch will definitely make more money than the company put into it. But whether or not they can stand toe-to-toe with some of the titans in the gacha industry like Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail, I think this will take a much longer time, like roughly a year's time. But between now and what I assume to be their 2.0 update in a year's time, if they continue this pace of fixing technical issues and rolling out hotfixes to make it more accessible to players, if they make quality of life changes to make gearing and navigating through the world and the menus less annoying, if they smooth out their writing and voice direction issues and continue to deliver stories to the same quality of the final main story acts and the companion quests, and if they continue to deliver on their event content and player-to-developer communication and generosity, then I think the game will have a very solid reputation as a game that just continuously gets better with each and every patch. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for sticking around till the end. Consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment on what you think of Wuthering Waves now that we're a week into its launch. I'm going to make a follow-up video on some of the changes that I hope to see in their 1.1 update or any future updates. But until then, thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.